Okay, we're going to try this again. I did an Australia part, and we ran into some noise, so I'm probably going to eliminate that. And then I found out that as I'm telling the story, I'm remembering more and more things that I want to get down. And so we're going to start back. We're going to call this maybe part 6. When we just got off the boat in Australia, and so we're in Sydney, and so there were a couple other guys, Americans, on the boat that Bill and I kind of chummed around with when we were on the boat. They were from Ohio, and so when they got to Sydney, getting off the boat, they were going to kind of split up, and one was going to go do something, and I don't know what, and the other one was going to, I think one of them was down there to actually be a plumber. The one that went with us, and so he was going to look into that anyway. And so we had heard about a town south of Sydney that you could get there with kind of a commuter rail train. Probably went down there 3-4 times a day and back. So one of these guys went with us, and we got on this commuter train, and we heard it was kind of like a beach town and young people and stuff like that, so we didn't know anything, so we just went down there, and we're on the train, and it's just packed. It was probably in the afternoon, rush hour, going home, and this train would go and make so many stops, and it seems like it took 45 minutes to get down there. When we got to this town, it was kind of like a little beach town, and it had a place to get off the train, like a train station, but it didn't seem real big. A lot of empty lots, all 2-story buildings, far apart, no big demand on the land. I've looked up since then on Google, and almost 50 years later, and it's like that's all very densely populated now, so it's almost like a suburb of Sydney. But so the three of us ended up renting a room in a B&B from a lady. It was upstairs, bathroom down the hall, and so we stayed there about a week, and we found this little place called Dino's, which we kind of thought was maybe from Dean Martin. Maybe he'd invested a bunch of money in Australia. Don't know that for a fact, but kind of had that little bit of American flair to it, and so kind of a fast food place. So anyway, one of the things Bill wanted to do is they had an IBM building in Sydney, and Bill was saying that IBM had their own phone lines that would go anywhere in the world, and they could call anywhere in the world and network, and it wouldn't cost any money. Probably cost IBM money, but so his thought was that he was going to go to IBM and ask them if he could call his brother Tom King in LA from Sydney. And that was a big deal back then. I mean, there's no cell phones, there's no, long distance, especially overseas, was, you could do it, but it was probably $1 a minute back then, and pretty expensive and kind of unusual. So we ended up making our way down to the IBM building, and we got inside, and we talked to them, and so I don't know exactly what happened. The secretary went back and talked to somebody, but anyway, they didn't let us do it. They weren't going to let Bill use the phone for IBM to call his brother, kind of a personal call, I guess, so they weren't going to let him do that. And so that was one of the things we did in Sydney. The other thing we did in Sydney was we got our India visa stamped in our passports, and so we went in and did that, And it seems like we spent about a week in this town, probably came into Sydney just about every day. And so one of the things I've noticed when I have been making this and talking about it is I was talking about some stuff in Australia, and it kind of jars your memory and goes, oh, I forgot about this story and this story and this story. And so I'm kind of coming back and doing a second shot at Australia. And so we stayed in this little town for about a week, and we headed down to Wollongong, I think it's called, south of Sydney, pretty good sized town. And then we were headed out to Wagga Wagga and Narendra, which is kind of on a line between Wollongong and Adelaide. And so some of the stories I forgot to tell was we were hitchhiking most of the time. Australians weren't real big at picking up hitchhikers. And so it seemed like we spent a lot of time walking. And so, but anyway, there were a couple of things that were pretty interesting. And one of them was a guy picked us up, and we started talking to him, and he had the day off, and so he literally took us about 100 miles out of his way. He just thought, well, I've got the day, and maybe it was one of those God things, but he just took us like 100 miles out of the way, and it was kind of out in the country and 2-lane roads, and so we got to see a lot of farms out there and stuff like that, and so he was kind of a godsend. And so he dropped us off in front of this guy's house, and we were hitchhiking, and nobody was coming by. And so the guy from the house came out, and he said, well, about 5 miles up the road here, there's an intersection with kind of the main highway. And so you're kind of on a side road here where there aren't going to be very many cars. And so he offered us a ride, and we took it, and he took us up to this intersection about 5 miles away on the main highway. And so one of the funny things that happened was, so he dropped us off, and Bill and I walked a little bit and kind of pulled off on the side of the road and started hitchhiking. And it's like the flies just came out of nowhere. And it was kind of one of those things where it was so ridiculous, we started laughing about it. And I mean, we had these packs that were kind of green canvas, and there were so many flies on them, they looked black. And so Bill had a hat again, and so he starts beating the flies off my pack, and I'm beating the flies off his pack, and we're making jokes about, will you hitchhike, and I'll beat the flies off of you. So anyway, if you've ever seen video of Australia in the outback, there's a lot of flies. And so the fly story is kind of continues on out at the sheep station, but when you first get there for a while, there's flies everywhere, and so you're wearing a long sleeve shirt and a big brim hat because of the sun is intense, and so you're trying to get the flies off you all the time. Pretty soon that wears you out, so then you go, well, I'm only gonna shoo the flies off if they're on my skin. Okay, so pretty soon that gets old, and it's like, there's too many flies, so it's like, okay, I'm only gonna shoo the flies off if they're in my face. Well, pretty soon you get to the point where I'm only gonna shoo the flies off if they're in my eyes, And you see videos of Aborigines and stuff, and they got, you know, the camera, and there's just flies crawling all around them, and, you know, that's just the way it is down there. But anyway, it was kind of interesting. And so, again, Australians weren't real big on picking up hitchhikers. You can't blame them. And so anyway, this brother-sister combination ended up picking us up. And I remember getting in the car and finally getting to the point where I'd killed the last fly that was in the car. And it was like, oh, we were just like exhausted from these flies. And so he was explaining to us that he had found himself in a position where he had to hitchhike like a month earlier someplace because his car broke down and nobody gave him a ride. And so he saw us and he decided to give us a ride. And so we got to talking to them, and they were nice, and, you know, they were probably, I don't know, 23, 24, 25 years old, and they had gone someplace on a little trip and brother-sister thing and coming back. And so we got talking about America. And so I said, well, what do you think America's like? Well, they started describing all these kind of Bob Hope movies. You know, the old movies out of the 40s where everybody ran around in tuxedos and they had mansions and servants and all that kind of stuff. And it's like they thought everybody in America was like that because that's the movies they'd seen. And so we're trying to set them straight, going, oh, no, those are movies. There's nothing reality about it. I mean, there are some rich people like that, not very many. And then we said, well, you're never going to meet the average American because the average American is never coming to Australia. You know, I mean, they're working at a factory or a job 40 hours a week just like you are, and they've got bills to pay, and, you know, they're probably never getting out of the country. And so that was kind of interesting. And so I want to check my notes here and see another thing that happened on our way to Narendra was we got a ride I call them kids. You know, I was 18 and Bill was 20. They were probably, I don't know, 16, 17 years old. Seemed like they were high school kids or something, but they were in this Jeep, like a CJ5 Jeep with a hard top, and they had gone to a Led Zeppelin concert someplace down in Australia, probably around Sydney, I would guess, and they were on their way back to somewhere. And so they didn't have enough money to get home to buy gas. And so they said, well, we'll give you a ride if you'll buy us some gas. And I said, okay, we'll buy you $20 worth of gas. And they said, okay, and we'll take you as far as we're going and in this direction. And okay, that sounds good. So we get in this Jeep, and I can remember I talked about this in the diary a little bit there were guys in this Jeep like stacked up like cordwood, and Bill's guitar. Bill packed a guitar all the way around the world. He kept it in one piece. So I remember going down the road, and there was just like guys stacked up in this thing like cordwood, and I was trying to count them. And there's like legs and arms, and I mean, it was so complicated you couldn't figure out how many people were in that Jeep. I kept thinking there was like 11, and then I'd get 9, and I'd get 10, and I'd count over and over and over. And anyway, I remember we stopped one time and got some gas, so we gave them $20 for gas at the gas station. So we end up going, and it gets to be night. And I'm assuming they were going to drive all night to where they were going, but there was a fork in the road, and they were going to the left, and we were going to the right. And so we got out, and it was dark, and there was nothing out there. No, gas station, no store, no nothing, just a fork in the road out in the middle of nowhere. So we ended up walking up a couple hundred yards to this tree. And I've got a picture of Bill standing up in the morning, and he's folding up a blanket or something. But anyway, we walked up to this tree out in this field, and because you're wondering if there's snakes out there, it's dark, you're just walking through this grass. It seems like it's 2-3 feet high for 100 yards. And then we got up to this tree, and it was pretty dark. And so we just decided to spend the night there under this tree. And so what made this so special was that we're laying out in the desert. There's no city lights, dark, clear blue sky. And we look up, and there's the Southern Cross right above our heads. And so all of a sudden it dawned on us, oh, that's right, we're in the Southern Hemisphere. The stars are all different. So the Southern Cross was a big deal to us. So we got up the next morning, and we walked up a ways, and this trucker kind of picked us up, and he took us up a ways, and we stopped at this kind of like a truck stop store thing, and we ended up buying us something a little, probably just a candy bar or something, I don't know what we were living on as far as food goes. We were just buying what we needed at the time, I guess, and we had no refrigeration with us. We couldn't pack food or store it or anything like that. So the trucker takes us a ways, and then he drops us off, and by then it's getting to be afternoon. It's pretty hot. I don't know how hot it is, but I'm guessing it's over 100. In fact, we learned on the sheep station that when they say it's 120 in the shade in Australia, it's 120 in the shade. And I'll tell you that story later, but it's probably over 100, 105, maybe 110, I don't know, but it was hot. So we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, no water, no food, This lady picks us up, and she was kind of an old lady, kind of reminded me of Bill's mom a little bit, just kind of, pretty strong, and this lady was out in Australia, and we don't know anything about her, but her attitude was, kind of like, well, anybody that stays out in this heat for a half a day is going to be dead. You guys better get in this car and get down the road here where you're going, and stuff like that. And so she was going to help us out, so we thought that was pretty nice. And again, maybe a guardian angel. You wonder if all these people were angels, because there's nothing out here in the outback. So we get to a fork in the road, and there's a gas station there, and that's as far as she was taking us. And so I believe Narendra was to the right, and the sheep station was, its name was Carringal or Carringal. And it's kind of probably, 10 miles from Narendra. Their nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. So the thing that happened at this gas station, we remembered, was, we went to the bathroom, and Bill left his cowboy hat in the gas station when he went to the bathroom. So we get about 100 yards down the road, and he realizes he's forgot his hat. So we go back, and nobody had come into the station. This seemed like this guy might see 4 or 5 people a day or something. And so we went back, and Bill's asking, hey, I left my cowboy hat here, have you seen it? And the guy said, no, I haven't seen it, I don't know what happened to it, I don't know anything about it. And anyway, we don't know what happened, but we kind of felt like he took the hat, and it was, we're Americans, so I don't know if that was some kind of trophy or something or whatever. But anyway, we kind of felt like this guy took this hat, and he wasn't being honest with him, but we weren't going to blame him either. So anyway, we're going down the road, and Bill left his hat. And so it kind of dawned on me last time I was doing this that, Bill left his wallet in Hawaii, then he left his hat in Australia, And when we were in Paris, I had a bag that he was carrying with all my stuff in it. It had a complete coin collection from every country we'd been in, from each coin up to a dollar bill, and a bunch of stuff I'd gotten in India that was hand carved and all this stuff, and he left it on the subway. So that was kind of a bummer, but that's later on in the story. And so we get a ride out to Carringal, and people drop us off on the road there, and so we walk over to this gate, and they've got kind of a mailbox out there that looks like a little house. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, got a little roof on it, and that's where people put the mail. The mailman, I guess, put the mail. So there's a gate there and a dirt road going off into the desert. Again, it's in the afternoon and it's hot. So we get a half mile, 3/4 of a mile up this road, and I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, I hope this isn't like 5 miles out here or 10 miles out here, you know, we're going to be dead. So anyway, we end up making it, and so I got to back up a little bit and fill in the gap of Carringal, the sheep station, and the guy we were going to see, whose name was John Lott. So my uncle, Earl, my dad's older brother, lived in Washington, D.C., but during sometime in the 40s, he was in England, and he'd spent some time in the hospital. And he shared a room with this guy named John Lott. And John Lott was an Englishman, kind of seemed like a Navy guy, and he ended up marrying this Australian gal. And so her parents owned this 17,000-acre sheep station, which is 21 square miles. They had 10,000 head of sheep, about 500 head of cattle, just to keep the grass down for the sheep. Okay, and all these different pallets and windmills and all this stuff. But anyway, they had, Earl Harder and John Lott had always kept in contact with each other with a Christmas card once a year or something like that. So Earl finds out, probably through my parents, that Bill and I are going to Australia. So he says, well, you need to go by and see this guy named John Lott. And so we were, and so that's what we were doing. And so we got to the house, and they had a couple houses there. The grandparents lived in one house, and John and his wife and 3 kids lived in the other house. They had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, probably about 9, 7, and 5, somewhere in there. And so they lived out on this sheep station. And so it was January, probably around the end of January, middle or end of January, and that's their summer down there. And so they were in the middle of shearing just the pregnant lambs. And so the big shearing, where they would bring in, 6 or 7 shearers, and that would probably be in July or August, but they were just shearing. So they had one shear, and so John, we went and stayed in these kind of bunk houses, kind of like a cattle drive thing, but it's sheep. And so I had my own bunkhouse, and Bill had his own bunkhouse, and in the main bunkhouse there was a kitchen and stuff like that. And so we would fix our own breakfast in the morning, and then she would fix us a lunch. Sometimes we would come back and get the lunch during the day when we were working and go out to the bunkhouse and eat it. And sometimes we would take a lunch with us, and she would make that lunch. And then at night we had dinner, or what they call supper. They actually call our lunch, they